Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the GLDS Second Symposium of Global Leadership, Dentistry, and Sciences. And I'd like to invite our Global Ambassador, Krista Sherban, to the podium to start us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Krista. I'm a dentistry student in Romania, and I'd like to welcome you all here on behalf of GLDS. I'm very happy to have the second symposium. And I would like to introduce Professor Dr. Claudia C. Cotca, the CEO of Washington Institute for Dentistry and Laser Surgery, professor with Liberty University School of Health Sciences, and researcher with Victor Babeș University of Medicine and Pharmacy Timișoara, the Dental Research Center using conventional and alternative technologies. I would now like to give the floor to Dr. Cotca.
Thank you so much, Krista. Krista, as mentioned, is a global ambassador. I'd like to recognize her for her excellent leadership in the GLDS forum, and also would like to recognize all the GLDS ambassadors joining us today, as well as welcoming all the GLDS members and colleagues from all over the world. That said, I'd like to start with our program, as it's certainly loaded with an incredible amount of expertise. We are hearing from one of our own GLDS Board of Directors, leaders, the Honorable Scot Faulkner, joining us from Washington, D.C. Metro. And so his entire CV, of course, could not be integrated into this introduction, but it is accessible on the GLDS platform as well as the full bio. I just like to highlight a few of his many highlighted expertise and historic accomplishments, and then invite him to the podium because I'm sure you are eager to hear from him directly. The Honorable Scot Faulkner earned a master's degree in public administration from American University and a bachelor's degree in government from Lawrence University. He studied at the London School of Economics and Georgetown University here in DC Metro. The Honorable Scot Faulkner was the first Chief Administrative Officer of the United States House of Representatives. His business-based reforms rebuilt the integrity of the House operations and generated sustained savings of approximately $4.5 billion. These reforms became a model for the operation of 44 national parliaments around the world, and were named one of the top 100 innovations in American government by the Ford Foundation and Harvard University. Private sector experience includes serving as global practice leader for the American Management Association, offices in Bangkok, Brussels, Buenos Aires, New York, and Tokyo, and vice president of the Philip Crosby Associates. He led strategic transformation for major global corporations, among them Congra, Hershey, Qatar Petroleum, and the Australia-New Zealand ANZ Bank. His policy columns are published worldwide in the Sunday Guardian of India, the New York Times, the New York Daily News, the Washington Times, the Washington Examiner, Newsmax, and Politico. He provides an on-air commentary for ABC Australia, NPR, PBS, VOA, Voice of America, and Talk Radio. He is the author of the critically acclaimed best-selling congressional memoir, Naked Emperors, and there's a link on our website, of course, accessible to that. With that, it's my distinct pleasure and privilege to welcome the Honorable Scot Faulkner.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and welcome all of you. Today, we're going to talk a lot about the health policy of the United States and how Congress and the executive branch are actually making some major changes in the way health is provided in the United States and guided and funded in the United States. You all probably in all your countries were impacted in some way, shape, or manner by the COVID pandemic. That certainly happened in America. And relating directly to health policy and health delivery, people started to realize when all these vaccines under what we called Operation Warp Speed back in 2020 were able to move very quickly from what we call bench to bedside, from basically the research lab to actually being used by patients. And so it started to make everyone realize that the regulatory structure in America and the delivery structure in America was far more cumbersome than it needed to be, especially as we move into the 21st century. So a lot of changes started to happen, and they're still happening as we speak. The main one is how fast that they're moving through the system. There's been a number of pieces of legislation in the last year passed by Congress, signed into law by President Biden, that have streamlined the regulatory process, the process for approving drugs and medical devices. The other piece of the puzzle is more and more of an interest in using what they call real-world evidence and remote trials. So instead of having to get everybody into a hospital environment to test a drug or test a medical device, you can now do this in a clinical environment, in some cases in home care. And so this is a huge jump forward, because once again, we're back to the issue of getting the tests happening in as close to the real way they're going to be used. The other part of it is recognizing that America, up until a few years ago, was very, very, I would say, parochial in looking at clinical evidence. Now they realize that worldwide, as long as the clinical protocols are being followed, whether it is in Iran, South Africa, Brazil, England, Canada, wherever, a trial is a trial. And so that has opened the door for a lot more input from literally around the world for clinical evidence to be used to speed the process of proving the efficacy of a drug, proving the efficacy of a protocol or of a device. The other piece of the puzzle is that, especially under President Biden, there's been a lot more emphasis on what they call equity, diversity, and inclusion. Now, while this is very political in the United States, it is also very viable and relevant to the world of clinical medicine and medicine in general, because there are traditionally underrepresented groups that are either being not diagnosed at all, or being misdiagnosed, or being not treated properly. And so this new emphasis on inclusion, this new emphasis on diversity, is improving the clinical trials, but also speeding the process of supporting the delivery of the needed medical care to what is considered traditionally underrepresented or underserved groups. So there's a lot of moving parts. The Congress in March of this year passed, again, for those of you unfamiliar with the way America works, every year we pass a budget, and our fiscal years run from the 1st of October to the end of September every year. And so Congress on paper is supposed to get their budget sorted out around this time each year and get it all in place. It has hardly ever happened. And so usually what you end up with is what we call a continuing resolution, where they basically pile all the money together for all of our agencies, all of our cabinet departments, and fund it for the next year. They only funded it for a few months, so they finally passed the full budget just in March to take us through the end of September of this year for what they call fiscal 2022. Now we're going to get into fiscal 2023 starting in October. And once again, lots of budgets being talked about, lots of legislation being discussed, but probably as we come down to the wire, because it's like literally only, even though we have quite a few months to the end of September, our legislature or Congress only meets a few days each week. And in some cases, we're off whole weeks for our national holidays. And of course, recently for all of our religious holidays. So the result is that there aren't that many actual congressional work days left before the new fiscal year. So we'll probably end up with another continuing resolution, no matter what everybody's talking about on the floor of the House and Senate and in the news media. But what's important is, in either case, that Operation Warp Speed took so much money away from general research in the medical world for these vaccines. There's been a major effort in the last year to replenish all of these traditional research programs and actually increase their funding. So a lot of these research programs within our National Institutes of Health, within what we call our Centers for Disease Control and also the Food and Drug Administration, which are our three major agencies dealing with health in America, are getting a lot more money and a lot more resources and a lot more attention than they have in recent years. So that this is all good. The other piece of the puzzle in all this is that we are in an election cycle. In fact, just yesterday, my home state had a primary, and two incumbent congressmen were running against each other, and one lost, one won. And every time somebody, especially an incumbent, loses, while that can change the ideology, but it also, you're losing some institutional memory. And so in this election cycle in America, we've got already 32 very senior members of the Democrat Party. Some of them were committee chairmen, in fact, chairing science committees, chairing health subcommittees in the Congress, have already announced their retirement for different reasons. And so all that institutional memory is going to leave at basically January of next year when the new Congress comes in. So that's a huge shift as well in terms of not only the ideology of Congress, but also the institutional memory and knowledge of Congress, because many times the staff people who serve those members will also leave. So it's you kind of have almost a brain drain situation of historic proportions coming up. The other piece of the puzzle is that at least currently the speculation is that the Republicans who are currently in opposition in America will probably at least retake the House, maybe the Senate. If that happens, then there'll be some shifts in priority again in terms of the way science and technology is funded, the way health is dealt with, and some of the current policies may be challenged or maybe expanded. So in America, things are always seems to be in flux, and because of the pandemic, because of these new ideas regarding delivery to underrepresented groups and funding and the way that technology is being supported, things seem to be speeding up than they have been in almost 2 or 3 decades. So it's an interesting time to be a practitioner in America. It's an interesting time to be a practitioner in the world, because as America approves these drugs, approves these new protocols and technologies, they're going to be benefiting people around the world. So it's a very interesting time. And the other pieces of the puzzle on this is that Congress also established again, with the lessons learned from the pandemic, they created something called the Advanced Research Projects Administration for Health, ARPA-H. You may have heard about it in some of your literature. People may have heard of DARPA, which is the Defense Department Advanced Research Agency, which actually created the internet back in the 70s and 80s, which we all use today and are using today. So ARPA-H is going to be, again, one of these almost bleeding edge or over the horizon kind of innovation centers to, once again, speed health delivery, speed the medicines, the protocols, the technology needed to really move us into the future. Another piece to this, demographically throughout the world, we're aging. The baby boom generation from right after World War II, we're all in our 60s, 70s, even some in the 80s. And so another concept, which I'm sure you may or may not have encountered, people have always talked about lifespan, but now people are talking about health span. And what that means is, instead of living to be age 95, but you're in a wheelchair and maybe having dementia, how do you live to be age 95 and still be an active adult, still have your mind, still be engaged with society? And so a lot of different policies are being explored, a lot of new technologies, even looking at holistic medicine, nutrition, diet, the whole area, which Claudia and I are involved with, dealing with light therapy and cellular function. How do we, if not stop the aging process, better manage the aging process so there's a true quality of life, a health span that people who are aging will have, not just simply a lifespan. And again, this is all being talked about in congressional hearings and being addressed in legislation. So it's an exciting time to be part of the health profession. And with that, I'll turn it back to Claudia and see if anyone has questions.
So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate, I would say, the comprehensive perspective of you, of course, in macro and micro composition, of course, from a perspective of internal operational resources here in the United States, USA model, but also interactives globally, as well as the anticipated reactions from the geo-position that's respective, and of course in different jurisdictions. With that, I'd like to formally thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. Of course, and we know that our platform will be accessing this particular segment. And of course, we look forward to seeing you back and welcoming you back. Thank you for your time.